All right, this is a newspaper from March 4th, 1978. It's the Chicago Daily News. This is their Saturday edition. They didn't publish on Sundays, so they would typically load up their Saturday edition with everything that you would want to find in a Sunday edition into their Saturday paper, like TV Guide and the Color Sunday comics, that sort of stuff. Their competition was the Chicago Tribune. There was another paper in Chicago, which is the Chicago Sun-Times. But at this point, the Sun-Times and the Daily News are actually owned by the same company. One is a morning paper, one's the afternoon paper, and then they compete against the Chicago Tribune. And unfortunately, on March 4th, 1978, as you can read from the headline, this was the last edition of the Chicago Daily News that was ever published. So they were shutting down the Daily News, and they were going to concentrate solely on the Chicago Sun-Times as being the sole paper that they would produce, and they would go head-to-head against the Chicago Tribune. So if we open up this Saturday edition, inside they've got the comics right there, you can see. But if we turn to the center, they also have the usual sort of goodies. There's their very, very cute little TV guide, which they call the TV News. And there's some other flyers and advertisements and all that stuff. There's a Woolworths one. And here's Panorama, which is kind of a arts, dining, books, and entertainment section. But the point of this is to take a look at the comics. So let's do that right now. Okay, so the comics start off with Wizard of Id in a quarter format. And then we hit the first of two really rare comic strips that they would carry in here. And the first of those two is right here, and it's Crawford. I mean, I don't even know how many other papers carried Crawford, or it didn't run that long. Fortunately, there's a book that's out now that you can pick up. This was by Chuck Jones, and it was a really short-lived comic strip, and you can, if you want to read it, you can just get there's this book that compiles all of them, which is great, because trying to track these down in a newspaper is, boy, it's brutal. This is an incredibly, incredibly scarce comic strip, and I'll zoom in a little bit so you can take a look at it. There you go, Crawford. And then right there you can see the byline by Chuck Jones.
I just want to take a minute to talk about the book that I was referring to. The book that compiles all of the Crawford newspaper comic strips is called Chuck Jones, The Dream That Never Was. It's published by IDW, and it's a hardback book. It's about 280 pages, and you can pick it up on Amazon or wherever books are sold on the web. It's a great book because it compiles this very rare newspaper comic strip. It includes the dailies and the Sundays, and it's nice because not only does it have the comic strips, but it also has original artwork, behind-the-scenes sketches, and a lot of other great information about Chuck Jones. So again, that book is called Chuck Jones, The Dream That Never Was.
And then to fill out the rest of the first page, at the bottom here we have Funky Winkerbean. And he unfortunately, poor Funky Winkerbean here is in really bad shape, because what they've done is they've limited him just to these last 4 panels. There's, I think, at least like 50% of this poor strip is missing, and I think it was done to fit in this Ronald McDonald ad down here at the bottom. So poor Funky Winkerbean, you just get the last 4 panels, and I can't even imagine how much they cut out to squeeze that in there. Okay, moving on. Second page, what do we have? Okay, moving on to the second page. At the top you can see we've got Cappy Dick with Fun and Games, and just below it we have Judge Parker here in the quarter format, and then below that we have Tumbleweeds, followed by the second very rare strip that was featured in this paper, and that is Howard the Duck. Now bear in mind, this is from March of 1978. When Howard the Duck debuts in June of 1977, within the first couple months, it's being carried by 80 different newspapers throughout US and Canada. But by March of 1978, that number had dwindled down to a total of about 20 newspapers total. So Chicago Daily News was one of 20 papers that were still carrying the Howard the Duck strip at this point. And then the strip would remain rather flat as far as the total amount of papers that would carry it would stay at about 20 papers until its demise in October of this year. October of '78 it would stop. And when it stopped, it still was in about 20 newspapers. Obviously, a few papers came on board, but then a few papers would leave, so it was pretty much flat at 20 papers from March through October of '78. But there it is. And I should point out also that even though this is the last issue of the Chicago Daily News, many of these newspaper strips would migrate into the Chicago Sun-Times, including Howard the Duck. So fortunately for the people in Chicago, Howard was run from its beginning in June of '77 up through this last issue of the Daily Times in March of '78, and then it just jumped, like without missing a beat, it migrates over to the Sun-Times, and the Sun-Times would run it all the way till its end. So that was nice. And I want to give a special shout out to Hans, who is the greatest Howard the Duck fan in the Chicago area. Thanks, Hans, for being such a great supporter of the strip. Okay, moving on to the third page. At the very top, we can see Jeff Hawke. Jeff Hawke was a British strip. This had been run in Britain, in the UK, and basically what happened was once Star Wars hit in May of '77, suddenly everything that was science fiction was like in demand and very popular. So what the folks that had created and run Jeff Hawke, what they did was they took Jeff Hawke strips and then syndicated them in North America. And it was syndicated in North America by United Feature Syndicate. And the weird thing is, Jeff Hawke, when this originally ran in the UK, it would just run as a daily. It would just run in, you know, single black and white strips that we would associate as the way comics look Monday through Saturday. But what they did was they took those daily strips from the UK and they reformatted them and they colored them in order to create these Sunday strips. Now just below that we've got Asterisk and Obelix, and below that we've got Tank McNamara, and then we have an ad down here for Sugar Daddy Candy. Moving on to page 4. Page 4 starts off with Frank and Ernest. Below it is the Captain's Gig here, quarter format. Rex Morgan down here, quarter format. And down here is a strip I know very little about called Charmers. Alright, page 5 has Marmaduke up here in quarter format, followed by Mama. And it looks like Mama's been truncated quite a bit as well, similar to what they did with Funky Winker Bean. And below that we have The Better Half. And then down here we have Carrie Drake in a quarter format. And then at the very bottom, The World According to Guinness right here. And that concludes their Sunday comics, because the back is just a giant advertisement. And that concludes the comics for Saturday/Sunday, March 4th, 1978, March 5th, 1978.
And that concludes our look at the final ever edition of the Chicago Daily News and its comics section. Let me know what you think of this video. Leave me some feedback, and I hope to have more coming soon. Thank you.